across East Asia, crimes have emerged that blur the line between reality and nightmare. These are not stories born from folklore, but events documented in courts, headlines, and police records. Each one left behind more than victims, they left echoes of fear that still linger. Tonight, we descend into 10 cases that should never be forgotten. Japan, Hong Kong, and South Korea have all witnessed horrors that defy comprehension. From unsolved murders to cult atrocities, from street massacres to crimes committed in secrecy, these cases remind us that evil wears many faces. The most terrifying truth is that each one happened in the open, under the same daylight we walk in. What binds these cases is not only their brutality, but the silence that followed. Families destroyed, lives erased, and yet justice often slipping away. Investigations stalled, killers vanished, and survivors left with wounds that never healed. The stories you will hear tonight carry a weight heavier than legend, because they are all painfully real. The crimes range from infamous names carved into Japanese history, to atrocities hidden in Hong Kong apartments, to mysteries in quiet Tokyo neighborhoods. Some cases remain unsolved, their shadows growing darker with time. Others ended in arrests, but no closure. Each one reveals how fragile safety can be, and how quickly it can be stolen. This is not a journey through imagination. It is an unflinching descent into violence, secrecy, and the haunting reality of human cruelty. 10 cases, each more disturbing than the last, stitched together by the same thread, a reminder that darkness does not sleep. It hides, waits, and strikes when silence convinces us we are safe. If you are ready to face these truths, subscribe to Echoes of the East and stay with us until the end. In the comments, write the city you are watching from, if you have the courage. Remember, these cases are not legends. They are history, and their echoes are still alive, waiting for someone to listen. In 1984, Japan was shaken when the president of Glico, a major confectionery company, was kidnapped. He managed to escape, but his nightmare had only begun. Soon after, letters arrived from a group calling itself the Monster, with 21 faces. They threatened to poison Glico's candy, plunging an entire nation into terror. Supermarkets emptied overnight. Parents feared every sweet their children touched. Candy once symbolized innocence, but suddenly carried the taste of dread. The anonymous letters mocked police, taunted families, and showed frightening precision. Trucks carrying Glico products were set on fire. The company's reputation crumbled. An entire industry bent under the weight of one faceless group's words. Fear itself became their weapon. The letters were cruelly playful. Written in childish style, they seemed almost gleeful. They called themselves monsters, laughing as they held millions hostage, with nothing but threats. Though no poisoned candy was confirmed, the damage was done. The public trust was shattered. Parents inspected every wrapper. Children were forbidden to eat what once brought them joy. The police scrambled. Hundreds of officers investigated, but the monsters were always one step ahead. They placed boxes of candy in public spaces, claiming they were poisoned, forcing panic to spread. Every supermarket aisle became a battlefield of suspicion. Police received countless false alarms, unable to tell prank from peril. The monsters reveled in the chaos. The torment spread beyond Glico. Morinaga, another confectionery giant, became the next target. Letters arrived, boasting of poisoned products. Stores shut down entire sections. Millions in losses piled up. The monster with 21 faces turned corporate empires into trembling prey. Yet through it all, no suspect was ever captured. They thrived in anonymity, a ghostly hand choking Japan. In a chilling twist, the group once sent police a letter promising peace if they stopped pursuing them. It was signed, "We forgive you." Forgiveness, from criminals who had dismantled lives. Mockery dripped from every word. The authorities, humiliated, could do little but obey shadows. The monster controlled the game, while the nation remained trapped in fear. The stress proved unbearable. The superintendent of the Shiga Prefecture Police, who led the investigation, committed suicide. His note apologized for failing to capture the criminals. His death was the only life the monsters directly claimed, yet its echo thundered louder than any poisoned candy. Japan understood then, fear itself had been the real weapon all along. The letters abruptly stopped in 1985, as suddenly as they had begun. No explanation, no arrests, no resolution. The monsters simply vanished, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The unanswered silence they left behind was heavier than their words. To this day, their identity remains one of Japan's darkest mysteries, a riddle soaked in dread. For years afterward, companies carried the scar. Parents still whispered warnings about unwrapped candy. The public learned that trust, once broken, may never fully return. The monster with 21 faces proved that murder was not necessary to destroy lives. All it took was words, threats, and shadows that struck deeper than any blade. Fear became immortal. Even decades later, the case is remembered not only for its cruelty, but for its invisibility. The monsters were never seen, never caught, never punished. They linger instead in memory, feeding on the fact they could have been anyone. A neighbor, a worker, a stranger in the crowd. And in that uncertainty, the fear still breathes. On June 8, 2008, Tokyo's Akihabara district, usually alive with shoppers and electronics enthusiasts, became a slaughter ground. A rented truck plowed into a crowded street, bodies thrown aside in an instant. The driver emerged carrying knives, stabbing anyone within reach. Screams replaced the usual chatter of the market. Within minutes, 7 people were dead and dozens wounded. The attacker was Tomohiro Kato, a 25-year-old who claimed society had abandoned him. Unemployed, isolated, and consumed by rage, he sought to strike at strangers simply because they represented life continuing without him. His posts online before the attack revealed intent. He warned that if people ignored his messages, he would punish them with blood. The massacre was meticulously timed. Akihabara, on a Sunday, was known for its pedestrian-only streets, filled with tourists, students, and families. It was supposed to be safe, almost festive. Kato's truck turned that sanctuary into a trap. Survivors later described how seconds felt endless, the sound of impact echoing through the district long after the engine stopped. When the truck halted, he stepped out, holding survival knives. He stabbed indiscriminately, showing no hesitation. Witnesses recalled his face empty, expressionless, as if humanity had drained away. People tried to shield loved ones, pulling them into shops, but the narrow streets offered no true escape. The chaos unfolded too fast for help to arrive in time. Panic spread through the crowd. Some tripped over fallen bodies, others froze in terror as Kato slashed again and again. Police arrived within minutes, but the carnage was already carved into the heart of Tokyo. The air smelled of gasoline, iron, and fear. Akihabara, the symbol of modern Tokyo, had been defiled in broad daylight. Kato did not flee. When police confronted him, he dropped his weapon and surrendered, almost relieved. His calm after the violence unnerved officers. In interrogation, he admitted his life felt worthless, and he wanted others to suffer with him. His crime was not only an outburst, was a deliberate choice to drag strangers into his despair. The trial revealed a man consumed by loneliness, rejection, and anger at a world he believed mocked him. Yet understanding motive did not ease the grief. Families buried loved ones, taken in seconds, with no explanation that could justify the loss. The courtroom became another arena of silence, each testimony heavier than the last. Kato was sentenced to death in 2011, though appeals delayed the inevitable. Survivors spoke of trauma that never healed. Some could not return to Akihabara, others avoided crowds entirely. The massacre had not only taken lives, but shattered the illusion of safety in one of the busiest, most modern districts of Tokyo. Fear lingered like a shadow. In 2022, his sentence was carried out. Yet execution did not erase memory. The spot where the truck stopped remains etched in collective consciousness. People still gather on anniversaries, laying flowers where laughter once filled the streets. The ghost of that day hovers, reminding Tokyo that violence can erupt anywhere, even in its brightest corners. The massacre of Akihabara endures as a scar, not only for its brutality, but for its randomness. The victims were strangers, chosen not for who they were, but because they were there. That truth is what chills most deeply. Anyone could have been among them. Evil did not knock, it simply arrived, and it could again. In late 1988, Japan was shaken by the disappearance of 17-year-old Junko Furuta. She was a bright student, cheerful and ambitious, walking home when her path was intercepted. What seemed at first like a chance encounter would spiral into one of the darkest chapters in Japanese crime history. A story so cruel it still echoes decades later. Junko was lured under false pretenses, told she was being escorted to safety. Instead, she was taken to a suburban house where her captors decided she would never leave. The house appeared ordinary from the outside, curtains drawn, lights dim. Neighbors heard laughter, music, and comings and goings. Unaware, the walls hid a nightmare unfolding behind locked doors. Days stretched into weeks. Junko's family searched desperately, unaware she was only streets away. Flyers were posted, news segments aired, classmates prayed for her return. Yet no one suspected that beneath the roof of an unsuspecting neighborhood home, she was being held against her will. The silence of the ordinary became the perfect disguise for horror. Her captors treated her suffering as entertainment, boasting to others while silencing her every attempt to escape. They stripped away her dignity piece by piece, reducing her to a shadow of herself. The cruelty was not only physical, but psychological, designed to erase hope. The house became both her cage and her grave, long before her death. The most haunting element of this crime is its visibility. Friends of the captors visited. Some neighbors suspected unusual activity, yet silence prevailed. Fear of involvement, disbelief, and apathy allowed the crime to continue. Junko's screams were muffled, her presence erased by indifference. The cruelty was compounded by the world's refusal to look closely enough to save her. 44 days passed in captivity. 44 nights, where the line between life and death blurred for a young girl whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every day stolen from her was another victory for her captors, who reveled in their unchecked power. She became a ghost long before dying. When her body was finally discovered, concealed inside a concrete drum, the nation recoiled in horror. Police revealed details too grim for newspapers to print in full. What emerged was the portrait of an innocent girl consumed by unimaginable cruelty. The public demanded justice, yet what followed only deepened the wound, staining Japan's legal system with shame. Her killers were juveniles, and their sentences shockingly lenient. Some served only short terms, later walking free. This injustice inflamed outrage, for no punishment could ever balance the suffering inflicted. The law protected the young perpetrators, while the true victim Junko was denied even her dignity and memory. The failure of justice ensured her story would never fade. Junko's case has since haunted classrooms, courtrooms, and conversations about crime in Japan. Her story is told not only as a tragedy, but as a warning of how cruelty can flourish in silence, and how systems meant to protect can collapse under pressure. She became a symbol of innocence, stolen, her name etched in collective fear. Today, people still whisper her name as a reminder of the darkness humanity can reach. The house where she suffered no longer stands, but the memory cannot be erased. The silence of neighbors, the indifference of the system, and the cruelty of her captors ensured Junko Furuta's ghost lingers not as a spirit, but as a scar Japan can never heal. In 1999, Hong Kong police investigated a case that would haunt the city's memory forever. It began with the disappearance of a young woman named Fan Man-yi, whose troubled life had already been scarred by hardship. Her absence raised few alarms at first, but behind closed doors, she was enduring a cruelty so disturbing it shocked even hardened detectives. Fan had been lured into the hands of men who believed she owed them money. What began as a demand for repayment spiraled into something darker, an ordeal driven, not by debt, but by sadism. For weeks, she was held captive in a Kowloon apartment that outwardly looked ordinary. Its windows shut tight against a city rushing past. Neighbors occasionally heard strange sounds, muffled cries mixed with laughter, but life continued outside those walls. Within, Fan's suffering became a spectacle for her captors, who treated her torment as amusement. The line between punishment and entertainment blurred, transforming her final days into a theater of cruelty, shielded by apathy and the anonymity of crowded city streets. When Fan's life finally ended, the crime might have disappeared with her another forgotten tragedy. But fate intervened in a chilling way. A 14-year-old girl who visited the apartment began having nightmares. She claimed Fan's ghost appeared, begging for release. Driven by fear, the girl confessed to police, unraveling the horror hidden inside the Kowloon residence. Investigators entered the apartment expecting little. What they found defied belief. Among clutter and filth, they uncovered evidence of Fan's captivity. But the most grotesque discovery lay in a stuffed toy-an oversized Hello Kitty doll. Inside its hollow shell were the remains of the victim, concealed in the very symbol of childhood innocence and comfort. The contrast was unbearable. A beloved character turned into a coffin. Detectives described the scene as surreal, a nightmare clashing with the familiar smile of Hello Kitty. For the public, the image became unforgettable. The toy, once harmless, was forever corrupted. Parents who once bought it for children now shuddered at its name, unable to separate innocence from horror. The trial revealed chilling details of Fan's captivity and the brutality she endured. Yet even in death, she was not granted peace. The defense twisted her troubled past into justification, attempting to erode sympathy. For many, the case highlighted not just the cruelty of her killers, but society's indifference to women living at the margins, unseen until tragedy struck. Her murderers were convicted, though none received a full life sentence. The leniency of the punishments angered the public, echoing debates similar to other infamous cases in Asia. Justice felt incomplete, leaving the impression that Fan had been failed, not only in life, but also in death. The court's judgment became another wound carved into the case. Years later, the apartment was demolished, yet the story did not vanish. Fan's ghost, said to still wander, became an urban legend in Hong Kong. Some claimed to see her shadow near the site. Others whispered her voice carried through night markets. Whether spirit or memory, she remained restless, bound not to walls, but to collective conscience. The Hello Kitty murder endures as one of Hong Kong's most disturbing crimes, not only for its cruelty, but for its symbolism. A child's doll transformed into a vessel of horror, a life erased and hidden inside a toy. It remains a reminder of how evil corrupts innocence, and how even the most ordinary objects can become monuments of dread. In the mid-1980s, Japan faced a faceless enemy. Newspapers and television reported on a mysterious group calling itself the Monster with 21 Faces. They claimed responsibility for threats, extortion, and taunts aimed at major companies. What unsettled the public most was not just the crimes themselves, but the group's ability to mock police openly while always vanishing into shadow. Their first targets were food companies already shaken by the Glico incident. Letters arrived, handwritten in childish scrawl, warning of poisoned products. Stores pulled goods from shelves, families inspected every snack, and a wave of paranoia swept through the nation. The monsters fed not on money or blood, but on fear itself, weaponizing uncertainty until ordinary life became unbearable. Investigators pursued countless leads, but every clue dissolved into nothing. Surveillance cameras caught grainy images of a man wearing a cap and glasses near suspicious drops, but his identity was never confirmed. Police cars, patrols, and stakeouts surrounded distribution centers. Still, the monsters stayed invisible. Their ability to strike and disappear felt almost supernatural, deepening the country's unease. The letters dripped with sarcasm. They mocked police incompetence, ridiculed security, and promised more chaos. At times they announced they would stop, only to resume later. This cruel playfulness tormented both authorities and the public. Even seasoned detectives admitted privately that they felt toyed with, as if chasing a phantom more cunning than any criminal they had ever faced. Media attention only amplified the fear. Headlines screamed of poisoned candies, while families whispered warnings to children. Sales plummeted, and entire industries bled millions. The monster with 21 faces became less a group and more a symbol of dread. No one knew how many they were, or if they even existed beyond the taunting letters that continued arriving. At one point, police nearly cornered a suspect. A man fitting the description from surveillance was tailed, but he slipped away, vanishing at a train station. The humiliation deepened. Each failed lead fueled the monster's confidence. Their letters gloated about outsmarting police, reminding Japan that even its most powerful institutions could be bent and mocked with impunity. Perhaps the cruelest blow was psychological. Parents feared the simple act of buying candy for their children. Stores were hushed, aisles half empty. A country known for trust and public safety now second-guessed every bite. The monsters had poisoned nothing, yet the illusion of safety was shattered. Fear had done the work of any toxin, and more effectively. The case took a darker turn when the head of the Shiga police, shamed by his inability to resolve it, ended his life. His death revealed the toll of chasing shadows, an institution broken by ridicule. The monsters claimed no physical victim, yet the loss of honor and the weight of humiliation proved fatal in its own right. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the letters stopped. No arrests, no closure, only silence. The monster with 21 faces vanished like smoke. Decades later, the mystery remains. The absence of answers is what terrifies most, the possibility that the monsters lived ordinary lives afterward, blending unnoticed among the very people they once terrified. The legacy of the case endures as one of Japan's greatest unsolved crimes. It is remembered not for bodies left behind, but for a nation held hostage by words. The monster with 21 faces proved that violence is not always physical. Sometimes it is psychological, unseen, and enduring. Their greatest triumph was not escape, but immortality through fear. In the late 1980s, Japan was confronted with crimes so disturbing they scarred an entire generation. Tsutomu Miyazaki, later called the Otaku Killer, preyed on the most vulnerable. Outwardly quiet and withdrawn, he appeared harmless, but behind his glasses and soft voice hid impulses that would horrify the nation, leaving families shattered and reshaping Japan's view of obsession, isolation, and unchecked darkness. Miyazaki's life was marked by deformity and loneliness. Born with a birth defect in his hands, he was isolated from peers, mocked for his appearance, and drawn into an inner world of horror media and graphic imagery. This obsession grew until fantasy and reality blurred. By his mid-20s, his reclusive lifestyle had fused with violent urges, leaving him dangerously detached from humanity. Between 1988 and 1989, Miyazaki kidnapped and murdered 4 young girls. Each disappearance initially seemed unconnected, isolated tragedies in quiet neighborhoods. But investigators soon saw a chilling pattern. The victims were chosen not for who they were, but for their vulnerability. Miyazaki targeted innocence itself. The fear spread quickly, parents clutching their children tighter, as whispers of a predator spread through Tokyo. Miyazaki's cruelty went beyond murder. He taunted families, sending phone calls and letters that deepened their grief. One victim's family received ashes and photos of their daughter, mailed directly by the killer. The crimes were not only physical but psychological, engineered to inflict the greatest torment possible. His desire for control extended far beyond the act of killing itself. The nickname Otaku Killer came from his vast collection of horror videos and manga, discovered after his arrest. The media painted him as a monster shaped by obsession with grotesque imagery, sparking moral panic about the growing otaku subculture. Parents and politicians blamed anime and comics, though the true horror lay not in the media itself, but in Miyazaki's twisted psyche. When finally arrested in 1989, Miyazaki showed no remorse. He spoke calmly about his actions, as though recounting ordinary events. His detachment horrified investigators. In court, psychiatric evaluations debated whether he was insane or fully aware of his crimes. The nation watched closely, torn between viewing him as a product of illness or as evil beyond comprehension. The trial revealed disturbing details about his fantasies and his inability to distinguish right from wrong. Yet the court ultimately ruled that Miyazaki understood his actions. He was sentenced to death in 1997. The decision did little to ease public outrage. Families of victims remained haunted not only by loss, but by the endless retelling of horrors in the press. While imprisoned, Miyazaki remained distant, rarely engaging with others. He sketched eerie drawings, often filled with grotesque figures, as though his inner world never stopped consuming him. Journalists who visited described him as polite, almost meek, yet chillingly detached. It was as if he lived in a world apart, a place no punishment could ever truly reach. In 2008, Miyazaki was executed. Even in death, his crimes lingered like a scar. The name Otaku Killer remains infamous, a reminder of how easily horror can be born in silence, in rooms where loneliness festers unchecked. His story became less about him, and more about the terror he inspired, proof that true monsters often look ordinary. Today, the legacy of Tsutomu Miyazaki is remembered as one of Japan's darkest modern crimes. His acts were not only attacks on life, but on innocence itself. For many, the case redefined evil not as supernatural, but as disturbingly human. Behind his glasses and quiet demeanor lay a truth Japan could never forget: that darkness sometimes wears the most unassuming face. In July 2016, Japan awoke to its deadliest mass killing since World War II, at a care facility for people with disabilities in Sagamihara. A former employee named Satoshi Umatsu forced his way inside. Armed with knives, he moved from room to room in the early hours, leaving behind a trail of horror that stunned the nation and defied comprehension. 19 residents were killed, and more than 20 others wounded. The brutality of the act shocked Japan, a country where mass killings are rare and guns scarce. What made the crime more chilling was its target, the most vulnerable, people unable to defend themselves. In silence and darkness, their lives were stolen by someone once entrusted to care for them. Umatsu had worked at the facility, but left months earlier after troubling behavior. He spoke of violent fantasies, telling colleagues and authorities that disabled people should disappear from society. His disturbing ideology was dismissed as delusion. Even after psychiatric evaluation, He was released. Those warnings, ignored, became prophecy. His return to the facility was not chance, it was intent. On the night of the attack, he restrained staff, sealing off hallways. He moved with calculated speed, choosing victims who could not scream, run, or resist. For survivors, the memory was unbearable. The quiet halls transformed into corridors of death. Neighbors later described the night as eerily still, broken only by distant sirens cutting through the darkness. When police arrived, Uematsu surrendered, without resistance. Calm and detached, he expressed no regret. Instead, he justified his actions, claiming he had acted out of mercy, eliminating lives he viewed as unworthy. His words were colder than the crime itself, reducing human beings to burdens. Japan, a nation built on harmony, recoiled at the chilling philosophy behind his violence. The trial revealed a man convinced of his twisted logic. Uematsu smiled in court, spoke casually, and refused remorse. Families of victims sat silently, shattered not only by loss, but by his arrogance. They demanded recognition that their loved ones were not statistics, but lives of value. The courtroom became a place where dignity clashed against hatred. Media coverage amplified the debate. Some focused on his ideology, others on the systemic failures that allowed him freedom after clear threats. What united the discussion was horror. Japan had not faced such open cruelty in decades. The massacre forced society to confront prejudice against the disabled, exposing how deeply silence can mask dehumanization until it erupts into violence. In 2020, Uematsu was sentenced to death. He showed no fear, no regret, insisting history would understand him. But history instead recorded him as a monster who betrayed both his community and his humanity. The judgment brought closure only on paper. For survivors and families, the wounds remained open, their nights haunted by the memory of locked doors and knives. The Sagamihara Massacre is remembered not only for its scale, but for its symbolism. It revealed how easily prejudice can become justification for violence, how unchecked ideology can lead to bloodshed. The victims were not nameless. They were sons, daughters, friends, and siblings. Their lives mattered, and their silence after death became the loudest condemnation of all. Even years later, flowers and prayers are left outside the former facility. Families gather, refusing to let their loved ones vanish into statistics. The massacre forced Japan to confront uncomfortable truths, that evil sometimes hides in uniforms of trust, and that the weakest among us must be protected most fiercely. Sagamihara remains a scar carved deep into the nation's soul. In March 1995, Tokyo's morning rush hour became a scene of terror. Members of the doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo released sarin gas inside crowded subway trains. Commuters collapsed as the invisible poison spread, burning lungs, blinding eyes, paralyzing bodies. Within minutes, chaos consumed the underground tunnels. 13 people died, and thousands were injured. Tokyo, a city built on routine, was shattered. Aum Shinrikyo, led by Shoko Asahara, presented itself as a spiritual movement, promising salvation. Yet beneath chants and robes hid an apocalyptic vision. Asahara preached the coming end of the world, convincing followers that violence was necessary for survival. They stockpiled weapons, experimented with poisons, and prepared for war. Faith became a weapon, and devotion turned ordinary believers into instruments of death. The attack was meticulously planned. Cult members boarded trains across different lines, carrying plastic bags filled with liquid sarin wrapped in newspaper. At coordinated stops, they punctured the bags with sharpened umbrellas, leaving the deadly substance to evaporate. Commuters, unaware, inhaled the invisible death. In seconds, ordinary routines, workers, students, parents turned into scenes of convulsions and desperate gasps for air. Witnesses described a nightmare of confusion. People staggered blindly, foam at their mouths, clawing at their throats. Others lay motionless, Their briefcases spilled across the floor. Station staff tried to help, unaware they too were being poisoned. Panic spread to the streets above as ambulances overwhelmed hospitals. The city, known for order, drowned in chaos it could not control. What horrified the nation most was not only the brutality, but the betrayal. Aum Shinrikyo had recruited educated member scientists, engineers, doctors, people who should have protected life instead, perfected tools of mass death. Their loyalty to Asahara was absolute, their humanity erased by belief. The realization that intellect could be twisted into fanaticism left Japan deeply unsettled. Authorities raided the cult's compounds and discovered stockpiles of weapons, chemicals, and more. Serene, they found plans for future attacks that could have been even worse. The cult had ambitions far beyond Tokyo, dreams of overthrowing the government, of triggering apocalypse. The subway massacre was not an accident of madness, but a calculated act in pursuit of a warped prophecy. The trials lasted years. Survivors testified about the horror of that morning, their bodies still scarred by lasting effects, nerve damage, blindness, trauma. Families of the dead demanded justice. Asahara, unrepentant, claimed his actions were divine. He and senior members were sentenced to death. Yet no punishment could undo the haunting images of Tokyo's underground, filled with silent, broken bodies. Even after executions, the cult did not vanish. Fragments rebranded under new names, claiming to abandon violence, but still orbiting Asahara's teachings. Authorities kept watch, but fear lingered that the ideology could spread again, hiding under the surface. The sarin gas had dissipated, but the invisible toxin of fanaticism proved harder to erase. Its shadow continued to stretch forward. The attack changed Japan forever. Security tightened across public spaces, and trust in fringe religions collapsed. Commuters never viewed the subway the same way again. The idea that an ordinary morning ride could become a battlefield unsettled the collective psyche. The sense of safety was gone, replaced by vigilance. Terror had entered through faith, and routine became fragile. Today, the Aum Shinrikyo attack is remembered not only as a crime, but as a warning. It revealed how devotion, unchecked, can rot into fanaticism, and how belief can weaponize even the brightest minds. The Tokyo subway still runs, but beneath its rails lingers memory, the reminder that salvation promised by some can hide destruction too great to imagine. On the night of December 30th, 2000, in Tokyo's quiet Setagaya district, an entire family was slaughtered inside their home. Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko, and their two young children were found dead the following morning. Their house, nestled at the edge of a park, had seemed safe. Instead, it became the scene of one of Japan's most haunting mysteries. The intruder entered through a second-floor bathroom window, slipping silently into the house. Evidence showed the killer moved room to room with chilling calm, leaving no sign of panic. Mikio fought back, but was overwhelmed. Yasuko and the children met the same fate. The brutality contrasted with the eerie composure suggested by the crime scene, unsettling even hardened investigators. What made the case more disturbing was the behavior of the killer afterward. Instead of fleeing, he stayed in the house for hours. He used the family's computer, ate ice cream from their fridge, even napped on the sofa. He left bloody clothing behind, but changed into new garments found in the drawers. The killer behaved less like an intruder, more like someone at home. Investigators recovered DNA, fingerprints, and countless personal traces. Yet the abundance of evidence only deepened the mystery. The killer's DNA suggested mixed Asian heritage, with ties possibly to Korea or Taiwan. His clothing came from brands not commonly sold in Japan. His profile was clear, almost detailed, but he remained invisible, a ghost walking openly among the living. The Miyazawa family was ordinary, well-liked, with no enemies. No motive ever surfaced. The randomness of the crime was what chilled Japan most. A family destroyed, not for revenge, profit, or anger, but seemingly by chance. Their home, filled with everyday warmth, had been violated by a stranger who seemed to enjoy inhabiting the ruins of their lives. Detectives worked tirelessly, combing the neighborhood for leads. They found traces of sand from a riverbank in the killer's belongings, suggesting he traveled through multiple locations, yet every thread unraveled. The killer had left everything behind: blood, prints, even his own feces, yet no arrest followed. It was as though exposure did not matter. He had vanished into the city's vastness. The case consumed Japan's media. Families double-locked doors, children were kept indoors, and the quiet suburbs felt suddenly unsafe. The idea that someone could slaughter a family, linger in their home, and walk away without capture was unbearable. The house in Setagaya, still standing, became both a crime scene and a monument to fear, frozen in time. Years turned into decades, and the trail grew cold. Each anniversary brought flowers to the site, alongside unanswered questions. Police publicly appealed for tips, but the killer's face was never revealed. The silence of justice made the case heavier with time. The Miyazawas became symbols not just of tragedy, but of the unsettling truth that some shadows remain untouchable. Forensic advances gave occasional hope. New DNA analysis suggested possibilities, but still no match. International cooperation yielded nothing. The killer left more evidence than most criminals in Japanese history, yet his identity remained locked away. He was both careless and untouchable, as if daring investigators to try while knowing he had already stepped beyond their reach. Today, the Setagaya family murder remains unsolved, one of Japan's darkest enigmas. The home stands abandoned, a silent reminder of that night. The killer's audacity, his comfort within the house, and his disappearance left scars on Japan's sense of safety. The Miyazawa family's story endures, as both tragedy and warning. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are those who vanish in plain sight. Across East Asia, whispers persist of disappearances tied to secretive religious groups. In Japan and South Korea, families reported loved ones vanishing after attending spiritual meetings. Authorities often found nothing but abandoned belongings, letters of devotion, or sudden silence. Official records list them as missing. But survivors claim they were taken by sects that promised enlightenment, only to demand absolute submission. One of the most chilling patterns was how ordinary the beginnings seemed. A seminar, a friendly invitation, a pamphlet offering peace. Young adults, searching for meaning, entered willingly. Soon after, ties to family were cut. Letters stopped arriving. Some parents received only vague messages, insisting their child was happy now, though the words felt written under coercion, stripped of genuine voice. In South Korea, accounts emerged of secluded compounds, where recruits were forced into isolation. They were deprived of sleep, food, and contact with the outside world, reshaped into instruments of devotion. Families who searched were often threatened or turned away by guards posing as worshippers. The line between religion and imprisonment blurred, and faith became a chain locked tight. Japan faced similar shadows. Reports linked disappearances to sects echoing the infamy of Aum Shinrikyo. Survivors spoke of psychological manipulation so strong that people abandoned careers, families, and identities. Some groups promised purification rituals, others demanded total loyalty to charismatic leaders. The missing were not murdered in alleys, they dissolved quietly into communities that swallowed their names and faces whole. Authorities struggled to intervene. Without evidence of direct crime, many cases were dismissed as voluntary disappearances. Police could not prove coercion, and laws offered little protection. Parents who begged for investigations were told their children had simply chosen another path. Yet behind that explanation lingered the reality. Some paths were carved by manipulation so profound it erased free will. What terrifies most is the invisibility. Victims were not dragged away screaming. They walked willingly, convinced they had found truth. Cult leaders perfected the art of rewriting minds, making chains unnecessary. Families described the grief of losing someone still alive, their loved one's body present but their essence erased, a stranger staring back with eyes emptied of familiarity. Some escapees eventually spoke. They described long halls where chanting never stopped, rooms without windows, rituals meant to erase individuality. Their testimonies painted pictures of modern prisons hidden within religious fronts. Each survivor carried scars not only of mistreatment, but of the knowledge that countless others remained trapped inside, silenced before they could ever find a way back. In both Japan and Korea, rumors spread of disappearances never solved, bodies never found, names never restored. Families kept shrines at home, torn between mourning and hope. Official numbers were scarce, but whispers suggested hundreds vanished over decades. Each missing person became more than an absence. They became proof that devotion can consume life itself, leaving only questions behind. Media coverage occasionally reignited outrage, but soon silence returned. Some groups dissolved, others rebranded, their leaders replaced but ideologies intact. The cycle continued, each new generation offering fertile ground for manipulation. The true horror was not only the past crimes, but the likelihood that new disappearances were already happening. Unnoticed, masked by words like faith and salvation, the disappearances tied to cults remain one of East Asia's most disturbing mysteries. These were not dramatic murders, but quiet erasures, lives swallowed by devotion twisted into control. They remind us that not all crimes leave blood behind. Some leave only silence, unanswered questions, and families waiting forever. Faith, once corrupted, becomes the perfect prison. And in that prison, echoes never fade. These crimes remind us that horror is not confined to legends or shadows. It breathes in locked rooms, crowded streets, and silent homes. Each case revealed not only cruelty, but society's vulnerability, our trust shattered by betrayal, our innocence consumed by fear. East Asia carries scars that never healed, etched into history not by myths, but by choices humans were never meant to make. What unsettles most is their ordinariness. The killers were not phantoms, they were neighbors, workers, believers. Evil hid behind normal faces, proving it does not require darkness to strike. These stories endure not because of gore, but because of silence, unanswered questions, and justice left incomplete. Memory itself keeps them alive, and forgetting would only invite their return. Tonight's descent into these 10 cases closes, but the echoes remain. They live in every unopened file, in every family still waiting, in every street that seems safe until it is not. True crime carries no comfort, only reminders. The monsters were real, their acts irreversible, and perhaps the most terrifying truth of all is simple: they could rise again.